At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's General G. Let's begin. To the stars, the rocks drifting between them, and whatever might be out there. Can you hear me? Sigrid said, holding the squared microphone hooked to the synthetic singularity behind the glass dome, a device that, in theory, could connect her planet to the equally theoretical galactic network, which unfortunately proved day after day to be fiction to a species that believed itself alone in the universe. To the stars, the rocks drifting between them, and whatever might be out there. Can you hear me? Sigrid said again, the same phrase she repeated every morning for several minutes as she stared at the reflection of her yellow eyes in the glass dome, the only feature of her lavender-colored face that stared faintly back at her, mirroring her frustration. To the stars, the rocks. The door beside her burst open, cutting the words cleanly in half. Sigrid flinched, her fingers tightening around the microphone as footsteps crossed the chamber. Professor Vranel stood in the doorway, an old Samir whose posture had begun to fold inward with the years, his once vibrant red hair dulled to pale strands. He paused when he saw her, his eyes lingering on the familiar sight of the microphone raised toward the glass dome, exactly as it was every morning. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed, long and tired, a sound born from arguments already lost. I'm sorry, he said at last. The Financial Committee has cut all remaining funds for the FTL Communications project. They're calling it unproven, speculative. His gaze softened, regret etched deep into the lines of his face. They've asked me to offer you a transfer instead. The nanotech team, they're making real progress, Sigrid. Things that might actually help our people. Treatments, cures. He hesitated, glancing once more at the silent dome and the unreachable stars beyond it. I know this mattered to you, but they want results that can be measured. Sigrid's breath caught. She lowered the microphone slowly, her mind racing to assemble an argument. Any argument that might change what was already decided. Professor, please, we just need more time. Think about it. If there are other species out there, they need time to translate our language. That's why we've been sending data streams all day, every day. The computational information, the mathematics, the visual representations of our world. We're giving them everything they need to decode what we're saying. Her voice gained momentum, desperation bleeding into her words. The morning broadcasts are just the beginning. We have to be patient. If we could just explain this to the Budget Council, make them understand that translation takes time. Sigrid. No, listen. She stepped closer, her hands gesturing toward the dome as if she could physically pull her argument into being. We've invested years into this project, years of data transmission. If there's someone out there, they're working on it right now. They could respond tomorrow or next week or next month. But if we shut down now, we'll never know. We'll have wasted everything. Please, just give me a chance to speak to the council. Let me explain. Sigrid. Professor Vranel's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through her words like a blade through water. The council already made their decision. I fought for this project. I fought for you. But there's no convincing them anymore. The decision is taken. The words hit her like a physical force. Sigrid froze in place, her mouth still half open on an argument that would never be spoken. She stared at the old professor, at the sadness in his eyes that confirmed every terrible thing he'd just said. Her vision blurred a little, and she blinked hard, trying to contain the tears that threatened to spill over. She would not cry, not here, not in front of him. But her mind betrayed her, flooding her consciousness with memories she'd tried to keep locked away during working hours. Her father's weathered hands pointing up at the night sky during camping trips. His voice full of wonder as he asked her if she thought someone else was looking back at them. Her older brother, Kellen, stretched out on the blanket beside her, listing off all the things he'd say to aliens if they ever made contact. The smell of the campfire, the sound of her father's laugh when Kellen suggested they'd probably want to try their traditional fire-roasted grain cakes. They were gone now, both of them. The landslide had taken them 4 years ago, burying them under tons of rock and soil, while Sigrid had been away at university. The news had reached her in the middle of an exam. She still remembered the hollow feeling that had settled in her chest, the way the world had seemed to tilt sideways. After their deaths, she'd thrown herself into her studies, into the one dream Kellen had shared with her on those starlit nights, that someday, somehow, their people would reach out to the cosmos and find they weren't alone. Getting this position, becoming one of the lead scientists on the interstellar communication attempt, had felt like honoring their memory, like keeping them alive in some small way. And now it was ending. Could she just give up? After everything she'd sacrificed? Every late night spent calibrating equipment and refining protocols? Every morning spent speaking into the void? Could she simply walk away and accept that her father and brother's dream, now her dream, would die here in this laboratory? Before she could formulate an answer, before she could even draw breath to speak, Professor Vranel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The weight of it was unbearable in its kindness. "You can stay overnight if you want," he said quietly. "They won't disassemble the machine until tomorrow. Take the time you need to say goodbye to it." He paused, his thumb rubbing a small circle on her shoulder in a gesture that was almost paternal. "But we have to let go of this project, Sigrid. I'm sorry." He left her there, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they faded into nothing. Hours passed. The laboratory settled into the deep silence that only came in the dead of night, even when the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Sigrid sat alone in the chair before the glass dome, the microphone resting in her lap. The lights had been dimmed to their lowest setting, casting long shadows across the equipment that surrounded her. The silence was absolute, so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat, a steady drum in her chest that seemed too loud in the empty space. Her long, pointed ears, one of the few features that distinguished the Samir from their non-sapient ancestors, picked up the rush of blood through her vessels, a rhythmic whooshing that normally faded into background noise but now seemed deafening. She raised the microphone to her lips. "To the stars, the rocks drifting between them, and whatever might be out there. Can you hear me?" Her voice sounded hollow. She lowered the microphone, waited 10 seconds, then raised it again. "To the stars, the rocks drifting between them, and whatever might be out there. Can you hear me?" Nothing. Just the echo of her own words bouncing back from the laboratory walls. "To the stars, the rocks drifting between them, and whatever might be out there. Can you hear me?" Something inside her snapped. Before she fully registered what she was doing, Sigrid slammed the microphone against the glass dome. The impact sent a dull thud through the room and a sharp jolt of pain up her arm. She gasped, pulling the microphone back and staring at it in shock. A small crack had appeared on the casing. What was she doing? This wasn't her. She didn't lash out. She didn't break things in fits of frustration. She was calm, methodical, scientific. That's who she'd always been, who she'd trained herself to be after her father and brother died, because falling apart wasn't an option when you were alone in the world. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she'd been too calm, too methodical, too willing to follow protocols and scripts, when what she really needed was the opposite, or rather, to be herself. To be Sigrid, not lead scientist Sigrid, not daughter carrying on her family's legacy Sigrid. She picked up the microphone again, her hands trembling. This time she didn't raise it to speak her scripted greeting. This time she threw away the script entirely. "I don't know if anyone's out there," she began, her voice rough. "I don't know if you can hear me, or if you even exist. At this point, I'm starting to believe we really are alone in the universe. But I'm going to talk anyway because tomorrow, they're taking this machine away, and I'll never get another chance." She drew a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on her reflection in the dome. "When I was a kid, my father used to take my brother and me camping. We'd drive out to the Sarvel Plains, where the sky is so dark you can see the galactic arm stretched across it like a river of light. Dad would point out the stars, and Kellen would make up stories about what lived on the planets around them. I remember this one time, I must have been 8 or 9, when Kellen decided there was a species of spacefaring musicians who traveled from world to world playing concerts. Dad laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. A smile tugged at her lips despite everything. We'd spend hours like that, talking, wondering, imagining. Dad would ask us what we'd say if we ever met aliens. Kellen always said he'd invite them to dinner. He was convinced that food was universal, that every species would appreciate a good meal. I told him that was stupid, that they might not even eat the same way we do. But he'd just grin and say that's what made it interesting. Her voice wavered. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. Kellen died 4 years ago. Dad, too. Landslide in the Corvin Mountains. They were on a surveying expedition for Dad's geological research. The whole ridge came down on them. She paused, feeling the old grief settle over her shoulders like a familiar coat. Before he died, Kellen was studying astrophysics. He wanted to work on projects like this one. He wanted to be the first person to say hello to another species. I used to tease him about it, tell him he was dreaming too big. She laughed, but it came out broken. When I got this job, I felt like I was continuing his dream, like I was keeping him alive somehow. For a while, it was exciting. Every morning felt full of possibility. But after years of silence, after years of speaking into the void and hearing nothing back, she trailed off, staring at the dome. I feel stupid. I feel like I've wasted my life chasing a dream that was never going to come true. And the worst part? I don't even know what I'll do tomorrow. Who am I if I'm not the person reaching out to the stars? The words lingered in the air, raw and exposed. Sigrid closed her eyes, the echo of her own confession tightening around her like a constricting loop. She was about to continue, about to dive deeper into the spiral regrets and what-ifs that had been building in her chest all day, when a voice crackled through the speakers. That's a lot to hear for a first contact message. Sigrid's heart stopped. Her eyes snapped open, fixing on the glass dome as if she could see through it to the source of the voice. But all she saw was her own reflection, her yellow eyes wide with shock, her lavender face pale in the dim light, her mouth hanging open without a single word emerging. It couldn't be real. She was hallucinating. The stress had finally broken something in her mind, and now she was hearing voices that didn't exist. "Hello?" the voice said again, slightly uncertain. "Are you still there?" Sigrid's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She stared at her own reflection, watching her lips form words that her throat refused to vocalize. "Hello?" the voice repeated. I can see your signal is still active, so I'm assuming you didn't just disappear. Did I break your communication thing? Is this working?" Finally, desperately, Sigrid managed to force words out. "How much of that meltdown did you hear?" There was a pause. Then, almost sheepishly, "Pretty much all of it? I mean, the translation algorithm locked on when you started talking about your childhood, so I heard the camping stories, the thing about your brother wanting to invite aliens to dinner, which I thought was sweet, by the way, and yeah, the rest of it." Sigrid felt heat rush to her face. Of all the things she could have said for a first contact scenario, she'd chosen an emotional breakdown. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. "Wait," she said, her brain finally catching up to the situation. "I called you you and used masculine pronouns. I'm sorry. I shouldn't assume." "Oh no, you're good. He, him works fine." "Right. Okay." She took a breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't believe this is happening. Am I hallucinating? Did I fall asleep at the console and this is a dream?" The voice laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to wrap around her like a blanket. "I promise you're not hallucinating. My name is Rich Heidi. I'm a human from Earth. I'm a software engineer, and I stayed late in the lab tonight to test out a new translation algorithm I've been working on. It's paired with a really powerful AI system that can extrapolate linguistic patterns from minimal data. When I hooked up the test, the first thing I heard was your voice. You were talking about your childhood, and I just listened. I'm sorry if that was an invasion of privacy. I probably should have announced myself sooner." Reality began to sink in, really, truly sink in. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a dream. This was actually happening. A smile spread across Sigrid's face, so wide it made her cheeks hurt. Her ears went rigid, pointing straight up, an involuntary response among her people when experiencing intense excitement or joy. She could feel her heart hammering in her chest, but this time it wasn't from anxiety or grief. It was from pure, unfiltered elation. "I'm Sigrid," she said, the words tumbling out. "Lead scientist for the Samir Interstellar Communications Project. Or, well, I was the lead scientist. They're shutting us down tomorrow. But that doesn't matter right now, because, oh, my ancestors, this is actually happening." She laughed, a sound that was half sob, half giggle. "And what are the odds? It's night here, and you said you stayed late at the lab, so I assume it's late there too. That's such an improbable coincidence, almost as improbable as, I don't know, communication across the stars." Rich laughed again. "Actually, I'm not on Earth right now. I'm on a research station about 40 light-years from your position, if I'm reading these coordinates correctly. But yeah, it would be night in my home country if I'm keeping track of Earth time the right way. Time zones get weird when you're hopping between star systems." Sigrid's mind reeled. 40 light-years. He was 40 light-years away and speaking to her as clearly as if he were in the next room. The implications were staggering. "I should tell you up front," Rich continued. "I'm not an ambassador or anything official like that. Just a guy who likes coding and stayed late to mess around with some experimental tech. But I'm assuming your species built this communication device because you had something to say, so what did you want to say? What were you hoping to find out here?" The question brought Sigrid up short. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. What had they wanted to say? The truth was, the project had always been more about listening than speaking. They'd prepared a basic introduction, cultural information, scientific data, a general greeting, but nothing profound. Nothing that felt adequate for this moment. "To be honest," she admitted, "I'm not an ambassador either. And we didn't have much to say beyond a proof of concept. This was just supposed to demonstrate that interstellar communication was possible. We were going to shut down tomorrow." She paused, feeling the weight of what she was about to say. "But talking to you now changes everything, doesn't it?" The realization crashed over her like a wave. This conversation, this connection, opened doors that had been theoretical before. It also introduced complications and dangers. What if humans were hostile? What if they wanted to conquer or exploit the Samir? What if this contact brought war instead of peace? Her people had no faster-than-light travel, no way to defend themselves against a species that could cross 40 light-years and have a casual conversation. And yet, there were so many questions burning in her mind. What did humans look like? Where were they in the galaxy? How long had they known about other species? Were they peaceful explorers or something else entirely? "Which is why I said I hate being the first point of contact," Rich was saying. "I mean, I'm great with computers, terrible with people. If there's a diplomatic incident here, I'm probably going to make it worse, though I guess since we're both not ambassadors, we're on equal footing for messing this up." Sigrid realized with horror that she'd completely spaced out during part of what he was saying. During one of the most important moments of her life, of her career, of her entire species' history, she'd been lost in her own thoughts and missed part of the conversation. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out, interrupting whatever he'd been about to say next. "I didn't catch all of that. This moment is overwhelming me. My mind is racing in 1,000 different directions." She took a breath, then let her curiosity voice itself like a child who'd just been given a new toy. "Can I ask you something? Is this your first contact too? Your species' first contact with someone from another star system? Or are humans an ancient species who have existed since the beginning of the universe?" Rich burst out laughing, a deep, genuine sound that filled the laboratory. "Oh, wow. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. First, no, we're not ancient universe-spanning beings. Humans are pretty new to the whole spacefaring thing, relatively speaking. We only figured out FTL travel about 200 years ago. Second, and this is gonna blow your mind, the universe is absolutely teeming with life." Sigrid leaned forward, her ears practically vibrating at attention. "There's a galactic council," Rich continued, More than 100 member species. Some of them are pretty similar to humans, bipedal, carbon-based, that kind of thing. Some are weird as hell. There are these sapient clouds of ionized gas that communicate through electromagnetic pulses. There's a species that exists partially in subspace and can only be seen when they want to be. Oh, and there are these transparent sapien centipedes that are actually really nice once you get past the fact that you can see all their internal organs. They make incredible music. Joy flooded through Sigrid's chest, so intense it was almost painful. This was exactly the kind of conversation she had with her father and Kellen during those camping trips. A universe full of life and possibilities, full of wonder. They'd been right. They'd been right all along, and she wished with everything in her that they could be here to know it. "What do humans look like?" she asked. The question came out almost breathless. "It's unfair that you probably know everything about my species from all the data we've been broadcasting, and we don't know anything about you at all." "To be fair," Rich said, "I literally just got the translation and data interpretation algorithms working. I haven't had time to look through any of your data yet. I don't even know what you look like. But I don't mind exchanging pictures if you want. I can send you an image file of a standard human, and you can send me one back. Sound good?" Sigrid's mind raced. What would they look like? Would they be similar to the Samir? Completely different? Would they have tentacles instead of arms? Compound eyes? Some incomprehensible form that her brain couldn't properly process? "Done," Rich said. "I just sent the file. Should be coming through on your end now." Sigrid stood, her legs a bit unsteady, and moved to the main console screen. A notification blinked in the corner, indicating a received file. She grabbed the microphone, pulling its cable taut. "Together?" she asked. "Together," Rich confirmed. "Opening in 3, 2, 1. Sigrid tapped the screen. The image resolved into a figure that was startlingly familiar and slightly alien at the same time. Bipedal, just like her. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. But the ears were too small, barely visible nubs on the sides of the head rather than the elegant pointed structures that the Samir possessed. The skin was too pale, a peachy tan color instead of lavender, and the muscle density was unexpected. The human in the image looked strong in a way that suggested their homeworld had higher gravity than hers. "Well," Rich said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "This could get awkward very easily. When species are too different, there's a tendency to focus on the differences until they seem insurmountable. When they're too similar, there's sometimes an uncanny valley effect. I'm hoping we're in the sweet spot where your species finds human shape tolerable." Sigrid found herself smiling. "I was expecting tentacles and a head full of eyes. This will make things easier." She paused, studying the image more closely. "You're actually quite handsome, in a strange, short-eared kind of way." Rich laughed. "I'll take it. So, question. Does your species have faster-than-light travel? Would you be up for an in-person meeting?" The question slammed into Sigrid like a physical force. She was just a scientist, a researcher who'd been working in a laboratory at night, who poured her heart out to what she thought was an empty universe. She wasn't qualified to make decisions about first contact protocols, about inviting an unknown species to her homeworld, about any of this, but her mouth was already moving. "We don't have FTL travel yet," she heard herself say, "but we figured out the mathematics a few years ago. Our engineers say we just need a few decades to build a working prototype." "Decades aren't good," Rich said, his tone thoughtful. "How would your people feel about us paying you a visit instead?" A million thoughts cascaded through Sigrid's mind. Permissions, chains of command, the fact that she was making decisions far above her rank and authority. The trouble she might put her entire species in by inviting an unknown civilization to their homeworld without consulting anyone. The possibility that this could end in disaster. But she also thought about her father and Kellen, about their dreams of meeting other species. She thought about the joy on their faces when they'd talked about the possibilities that existed among the stars. She thought about how, after years of speaking into the void had finally spoken back. Her mouth moved before her brain could stop it. "When are you guys coming to pay a visit?" The next morning found Sigrid standing beside Professor Vanel in the same laboratory that had witnessed her breakdown the night before. Both of them watched in stunned silence as the council leaders, President Kalira herself, stood toe-to-toe with a human ambassador, her voice tight as she tried to maintain diplomatic composure. "You arrived without permission," President Kalira said, her hands clasped behind her back in a gesture that Sigrid recognized as anger. "You entered our atmosphere, landed a vessel on our soil, and presented yourself at our Capitol building as if this were a social call rather than an unprecedented breach of our sovereignty." The human ambassador, a tall woman with dark skin and silver hair pulled into a tight bun, nodded slowly. "President Kalira, I understand your concern. However, first contact had already been made. One of our engineers spoke with one of your scientists last night. We were invited." Behind the president, 3 generals shifted uneasily. Sigrid could see them exchanging glances and could read the tension in their postures. She'd overheard one of them speaking to the president before the humans arrived, warning her that the Samir military had analyzed the human vessel and concluded that their species wouldn't stand a chance if the president decided to escalate things. The ship was simply too advanced, too well armed. Any conflict would be over before it began. Sigrid's gaze drifted to Rich, who stood awkwardly in the corner of the room. He wasn't part of the official diplomatic team. He'd come along as the person who'd actually made first contact. Their eyes met across the space, and she saw the exact moment he realized that she wasn't exactly authorized to have invited humanity to her planet. His expression shifted from friendly curiosity to mild panic, as if he'd just understood that they'd both accidentally created an interstellar incident. The back and forth between the president and the ambassador continued for another 20 minutes. Gradually, the temperature in the room cooled. The ambassador made concessions, acknowledged the breach of trust, and offered formal apologies. The president, in turn, seemed to recognize that hostility would accomplish nothing when faced with a technologically superior species that had, so far, shown nothing but friendly intent. Sigrid saw the moment the generals relaxed, the rigid line of their shoulders easing as the conversation turned from potential conflict to actual diplomacy. Then the president turned to her. "Scientist Sigrid," she said, her yellow eyes boring into Sigrid's soul. "Explain to me how you made first contact alone, just one day after your project was cancelled." All eyes in the room fixed on her. Sigrid felt her throat close up. She'd prepared an explanation during the sleepless hours of the night, had rehearsed it in her mind a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, her words tangled themselves into knots. The project was ending, so I stayed late, and I was just... I've been broadcasting every morning for years, so I thought... She trailed off, aware that she sounded incoherent. The timing was coincidental. I didn't expect... Rich stepped forward, cutting smoothly into her floundering explanation. "President Kalira, if I may, what happened last night was a cosmic accident. Sigrid was performing her standard communication, and I happened to be testing a new translation algorithm at the exact right moment to pick up her signal. Neither of us were the right people to handle the situation, but we did the best we could under the circumstances." He paused, meeting the president's gaze steadily. "If there's blame to assign for the breach of trust, I'll take half of it. I should have immediately contacted my superiors instead of engaging in conversation. But I'm glad I didn't, because your scientist is brilliant, and she deserves recognition for her dedication to this project." The president's expression remained neutral, but Sigrid thought she detected a slight softening around the eyes. For the next half hour, she and Rich worked together to explain the circumstances from both sides, the years of broadcasts, the canceled funding, the late-night test, the conversation that had spiraled into an invitation. Slowly, piece by piece, the president's skepticism transformed into understanding. Finally, President Kalira nodded. "Very well. I accept that this was an unusual situation. Now, Ambassador, tell me what's out there. How many species are we talking about?" The human ambassador, who'd introduced herself as Ambassador Clark, smiled. The Galactic Council currently has 143 member species. Some are very active in interstellar politics. Others prefer to keep to themselves. There are a few dangerous species we have to watch out for. Some antisocial ones that refuse to engage. And then there's everyone in between. She paused, her smile widening. The Council has a somewhat amusing designation for humanity. They call us Deathworlders. Everyone in the room, from the Samir delegation, exchanged confused looks. I'm sorry, Professor Vranel said, speaking for the first time. Deathworlders? Ambassador Clark nodded. Most species in the galaxy evolved on what we'd consider relatively gentle planets. Stable climates, few natural predators, abundant resources. Earth, she laughed. Earth is what the Council classifies as a Class 13 death world. It means our planet is actively hostile to life. We have extreme weather, dangerous predators, toxic plants, natural disasters. We evolved in an environment that was constantly trying to kill us, and it shows in our biology and culture. The Samir representative stared at her in disbelief. We're probably going to have some explaining to do to the Council, Ambassador Clark continued. Making contact with a pre-FTL species is technically against the rules, but since you've already figured out the mathematics and are close to developing the technology yourselves, I suspect they'll give us a pass, especially since the contact was accidental. The next hour was spent with the humans introducing the Samir delegation to the concept of death worlds. They explained Earth's gravity, which was 30% higher than the Samir homeworld. They described predators like bears and sharks and crocodiles. They showed images of hurricanes and tornadoes and volcanic eruptions. They talked about the fact that humans had evolved as endurance hunters, capable of pursuing prey for hours until the animal literally died of exhaustion. By the end of the presentation, Sigrid noticed that every Samir in the room was looking at the humans with a weird mixture of awe and terror. These friendly, smiling beings who'd arrived bearing gifts and diplomatic overtures were apparently born from a world that would kill a Samir within days. Half a cycle later, Sigrid stood on the observation deck of a human vessel, watching as the stars streaked past in faster-than-light travel. Beside her stood Rich and the rest of the human diplomatic team. Around her stood President Kalira, Professor Vranel, and a carefully selected delegation of Samir representatives. They were traveling to the core worlds, to the seat of the Galactic Council, where the Samir would be formally introduced to the wider galaxy among humanity's powerful umbrella. The Council had agreed to fast-track the Samir's membership application, citing their advanced understanding of FTL mathematics and the unusual circumstances of their first contact. Sigrid had been awarded the highest civilian honor her species could bestow, the Star of Contribution, for her patience and dedication to the Interstellar Communication Project. The medal hung around her neck, a physical reminder of how far she'd come from that night in the laboratory when she'd thought her life's work was ending. In her hands, she held something even more precious, an FTL-capable datapad, the first one given to a member of her species. It opened up access to the Galactic Information Network, to databases spanning thousands of worlds and millions of years of accumulated knowledge. She'd already enrolled in courses on xenobiology, a field that had only existed in theoretical form for the Samir until a few weeks ago. Now it stretched before her like an endless frontier, full of possibilities she'd never imagined. Sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she'd call Rich. They'd talk about that first contact, about how improbable it all was, about how neither of them had been qualified for the moment but had stumbled through it anyway. They'd talk about their unconventional friendship, born from a cosmic accident and mutual awkwardness. They'd talk about the future. The Samir were not alone in the universe. That truth, once a desperate hope whispered to uncaring stars, was now solid and real. Her people stood on the precipice of something vast and unknowable, ready to take their place among the species that called the galaxy home. Sigrid thought about her father and Kellen. about those nights under the stars when they'd wondered if anyone was looking back. She thought about how proud they'd be to see her now, traveling between star systems, about to introduce their entire species to a galactic community they'd only dreamed about. The stars stretched ahead, no longer silent and distant, but full of voices and possibilities, full of life, full of friends she hadn't met yet, species she hadn't encountered, worlds she hadn't explored. And Sigrid, daughter of dreamers, sister to the stars, smiled as the ship carried her people toward a future brighter than any she'd dared to imagine.